I want to talk about prophecy, because we're in a season where prophecy figures reasonably heavily in terms of what we're celebrating, the birth of Christ. And I think most of you have heard this part before. This is Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. When, as his mother Mary was espoused to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man, not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily. But while he thought on these things, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a dream, saying, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary for thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Ghost. And she shall bring forth a son, and thou shalt call his name Jesus, for he shall save his people from their sins. Now all this was done, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. Now, there's two things, and I'm not sure if I'll get to both of them, but one thing was one of those little, God's providence and timing was that I was going to talk about that, and then we're going to sing a kid's song out, and then I think, well, let's sing Walking Along or whatever, and Ian says, you want to sing the Virgin Mary had a baby boy, and then, oh yes, believe it, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about, because this prophecy, some people have problems with it, and some people have problems believing in the virgin birth. And the reason is we all know how that works, and so it's like, wait a minute, there's got to be people no, there's got to be like some, like, well, or, I mean, and they don't believe it, and that's a stumbling block, right? And in fact, many of the non-believers, especially the vocal non-believers, will point to that and be like, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? Like, some of the stuff they can, not trying to get into the miraculous here too much, but just to highlight, they'll talk about the plagues, and they'll say, well, plagues happen. The locusts, there are locusts, those exist, so, whatever. And even the Red Sea, they'll say, well, with the tide and the wind and something, it's like, yeah, and stuff like that. Even walking on the water, I've heard like, well, there could have been like a sandbar, around stuff like that. So there's this kind of penchant to not want to believe the miraculous, and to point out like, no, that can't happen. And specifically this element of prophecy, right? Because it's one thing for something miraculous to happen, but when God uses miracles, when God does something supernatural, he is doing it not just to show off. I mean, actually, let me back that up. Kind of just to show off. Because he's doing it to show what he can do, and he's doing it to show that this is the thing. This happened. Like, remember? That's what he always says. Like, what are the Jews supposed to do when they get to the promised land? They're supposed to write on the doorpost, and they're supposed to talk about it, and then when they say, when your son comes to you and says, what do all these things mean? What are all these statutes? What is all this about? And what does he say? We were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord delivered us and brought us out with a mighty hand and brought sore signs and wonders upon Pharaoh. So the remembrance, especially for the Jewish people, is specifically those signs and the prophecies. And like, this was said it was going to happen, and then it happened. And you remember that, and then of course a couple generations go by and they no longer remember it, right? But they're always doing that. Here I raise mine Ebenezer, hitherto thy help has come, right? From that hymn. Well, what is that? That's Joshua crossing the Jordan. Because we forget maybe sometimes that the Jordan, they were going up to the Jordan, big river, right? They're trying to get over it. And again, like with the Red Sea in Exodus, God parts the waters. And they walk across the Jordan, and Joshua gets a bunch of stones and piles them up. It's like, and he calls it like an Ebenezer, a reminder, like, remember, we were there, the seas parted, we saw it. And the foretelling, right? So it's not just that like Mary was a virgin and that was miraculous, because that wasn't necessary. There's nothing necessary about that. There's nothing particularly necessary about Mary being a virgin. There's nothing necessary about any of what happened. It could have been another way. And the reason that it wasn't another way is because it was prophesied to be that way, right? And so it's specifically about the prophecy that's important, okay? Now, predicting the future, right? I can't remember exactly when it is in, maybe it's in Samuel, maybe it's in Joshua or Judges, but he says, like, test a prophet. You're going to know that they're prophetic because what they say happens, right? So it's literally like God saying, hey, this is a thing. And you always had the prophets in the Old Testament. But the issue I have with it is that when you look at how many of you, we're not going to take place. Mentally raise your hand. How many of you have read through all of Isaiah? Mentally raise your hand, okay. Mentally raise your hand if you've read through all of the prophets in the Old Testament, just mentally. It doesn't matter, okay. But if you read through it, this is Isaiah chapter 7. And I'm going to skim kind of, but listen. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Okay, so now we're already like, who's hearing the prophecy? Right? What are we talking about here? This is some historical, okay, all right, fine, let's keep going, Isaiah. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is a confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the hearts of the people, and the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Then said God unto Isaiah, Go forth now and meet Ahaz, thou and Shear-Rashidov, thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway and the foot, and say unto him, Take heed, be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for two tails of the smoking firebrands, and he's going on all this stuff. And this is a message that Isaiah is told to deliver to Ahaz, who's the son of Jotham, so he's a king of Judah. So Isaiah, because of the situation with Syria and some wars, Isaiah is told to go to this king and tell him this stuff. And my point is that then you get down to verse 14. Moreover, the Lord spake again unto Ahaz, saying, Ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. And he said, Hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will ye weary my God also? So this is a conversation between Ahaz and Isaiah, right? Verse 14. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. Okay? So, that verse, if you read that by itself, if you read that chapter, you're not going to be thinking about something hundreds of years later unrelated to that situation. You see what I'm saying? How do we know what is prophecy? Does anyone ever think about that? How do we know what is prophecy? I think a hint is at the end of the book of Luke. The two disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus. And Jesus comes and stands next to him, but they didn't know it was him. And, he said, what's going on? And they say, wow, there was this happened, this guy, and he died, they crucified him. And then Peter's saying that they maybe have seen him. And then Jesus says, didn't you know that was supposed to happen? Didn't you tell the times and the seasons? And it says I can't remember the word is used. It says he revealed to them the scriptures. He explained it. He gave it. The Holy Spirit, who gave at that point to the disciples the understanding of the prophecies, so that they could go through the 66 chapters in Isaiah, and they could see that, and they could understand that was a prophecy of the Virgin Mary, right? And then later, I mean, even you have an example in the Acts, chapter 2. When Peter is preaching, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs." Again, there's this point about proving by a sign. "Which God did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know. Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore my heart did rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover also my flesh shall rest in hope, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." Does anyone know where that's from? That's Psalm 16. Okay, so you see Peter, and again, if you read Psalm 16, "Preserve me, O God, for in thee do I put my trust." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is a Psalm of David, and you read it like it's a psalm, it's David pouring his heart out. And Peter, because this is just the day of Pentecost that's happened, and Peter has the understanding. So he says, David's talking about Jesus. It's all in there, and the prophecies, we understand them by the working out of them, and by it being shown later, and then they can write the book of Matthew, and they can say, that was done, so that this prophecy of the virgin birth should be fulfilled. Okay? Now, the second thing that happened this morning is because I'm trying to put in each one of, whenever I talk, I'm going to try to put some reference to, at the very least, some sort of historical thing. I almost didn't mention Kierkegaard, but now I mentioned him, so like I said. But I'm also going to try to do some sort of linguistic thing for the benefit of my daughter Luthien, because she very much appreciates that. And so I had one all planned out, you see, because there's much consternation about Isaiah and the translation of the word virgin. How many of you have looked into this? Okay? Because the word in Hebrew is Alma. And Alma means young woman. Or really, I would say, because they're all, words or symbols. Did you ever hear that? I don't know if I've said that one before. You know when people say literally? Literally means symbolically. Did you ever figure that out? Because it's literally like written, literary, which words are symbols. So literally means symbolically. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in the back of your head. But Alma means maiden, right? That's how it would be said, maiden. What does that mean? It implies virginity, sort of, right? It's kind of like culturally, right? And in fact, Alma is 9 times in the Old Testament. Okay? And I was going to talk about translation. And I was, because do you know that before the New Testament was translated, certainly, they had translated the Old Testament into Greek. We know this, right? Okay, it's a document called the Septuagint. Okay? And the Septuagint has a prefix on it, which is sep. And sep, it references 7, as our French speaker would point out. And I'll prove it to you, because September is the 7th month of the year. Well, no, because oct is 8, right? We know. Come on, we can do the basic Latin roots here. Sep is 7, oct is 8, and October is the 8th month of the year. Okay, and then Nov is 9, right? And November is the 9th month of the year. And obviously 10, December, decade, decennial, is the 10th month of the year. No, it's not. Okay, there's a problem with that? Okay, well, you see, what they did was, those people back then, they decided that there were these 2 really important people that they needed to remember forever and ever, because they had changed the world forever. One of them's name was Julius Caesar. And so they made a month in his honor, and they called it July. And then another one was this guy, Caesar Augustus. And they made a month in his honor, and they called it August. And they put those in the middle of the calendar. So that's why September is the 9th month, even though Sep comes from 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. Okay? So So the thing is the Septuagint has something to do with 7. Okay, and I know it. Does anyone know what it has to do with 7? Well, I'm going to read to you. I picked up this Bible today, and this is a very Ian would approve. I think it's a Cambridge authorized, Cambridge University Press. I love this. Rights in the authorized King James version of the Bible are vested in what? The Crown. Okay, the Crown owns this translation. Okay, this is the real deal here. This is the one. It's literally authorized. And I'm looking through it, and I read this. This is this portion in this, because this is, it's got, at first it has like a 2-page letter to King James by the translators. And then it has a section, the translators to the reader. Right, so this is in 1611, I want to say, they translated this. And they wrote this to the reader, and it has a whole thing about how they did it, right? And so this is section, the translation of the Old Testament out of the Hebrew and into Greek. While God would be known only in Jacob, and has his name great in Israel, and in none other place, while the dew lay on Gideon's fleece only, and all the earth besides was dry, then for one and the same people, which all spake, all of them, the language of Canaan, that is Hebrew, one and the same original in Hebrew was sufficient. But when the fullness of time drew near, that the Son of Righteousness, the Son of God, should come into the world, whom God ordained to be a reconciliation through faith in his blood, not of the Jew only, but also of the Greek, yea, all of them that were scattered abroad, then, lo, it pleased the Lord to stir up the spirit of a Greek prince, Greek for descent and language, even Ptolemy, Philadelph, king of Egypt, to procure the translating of the book of God out of Hebrew into Greek. This is the translation of the 70 interpreters. That's why it's called the Septuagint, because they got these 70 Jewish scholars. Ptolemy, right? So we have Greece, we have the Peloponnesian War, we have Alexander the Great in Macedonia conquering that whole area and basically spreading Greek culture throughout. And then we have the 3 empires that come after that, and one of them is the Ptolemaic Empire, which is centered around Egypt. So Ptolemy is the king of Egypt, and he's like a Greek speaker, and he commissions these 70 Jewish scholars to translate Hebrew into Greek. So these are 70 scholars. This is before Christ. They are choosing the words to translate. And they see the word Alma, okay? And the translation of the word Alma is Parthenos, okay? And it's got a theta in it, right? The Greek alphabet's got theta. I think it's got pi. It's going to look like Parthenos, okay? What is where are we going? Historical references here. Where's the Parthenon? Right? The Parthenon is in Athens, right? The Parthenon is a shrine to who? To the goddess Athena. And Athena, one of her names was Athena Parthenos, meaning Athena the Virgin. Because Athena that was one of her things. She didn't have a partner. And it is said also that Athena was generated out of Zeus's head, right? Greek mythology, she was just parthegenerated. She was, the word, it means without, like, sex. That's how she was generated. So this word Parthenos specifically refers to that aspect of Athena. And that is the word that they put in this when they translated it a couple hundred years before Christ. And they wouldn't have had any reason to put it in that section about Ahaz and the Syrians or anything like that, but because, as even the translators acknowledge, right, it stirred up the heart of the prince to translate it. They put it in, that word, and then later it makes sense. They're like, it's a sign because she was a virgin, and that was important because it shows the prophecy, and it shows that it happened. And we can all, as it says, believe it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And one other thing about prophecy. There's a prophecy that's later in Isaiah. It's chapter 9. And I can guarantee you, and I can prove to you, that this prophecy came true. Because Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." And we actually call him that to this day, 2,000 years later, on and on and on. We still call him that. People who don't believe call him that. That actually happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.